And I think that's a good reminder, just that hide it under a bushel? No!
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 132. I'm Brian Shealy.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much everyone for tuning in. If our episode sounds a little bit different today, it's because it is different today. For the very first time since we began the Bible Geeks, we are literally recording on the same bench in Indiana. This is bananas.
Not only are we together, but we are also outside, right next to the lake at beautiful Pokagon State Park on the Indiana-Michigan border. On, what is this? What bench? Well, there's a name for this bench.
It's the Bench of Knowledge. I'm literally sitting on the Bench of Knowledge. We're overlooking the lake. And sitting on the Bench of Knowledge, it feels fitting to...
Yeah, I feel wiser than normal. This isn't quite the seat of Moses, but it's. I mean, the Bench of Knowledge, that sounds like a good place to talk. I don't know if we're worthy, but
No,
we'll
for
work
sure
with
not. All right, so we're going to start off the episode. We are continuing this conversation about leadership. Last week we were off. We had a replay episode. We were going to talk about meekness, but I think we'll probably fit that conversation into this discussion today. Our third aspect of what we're talking about with leadership today is letting our lights shine. And we always sing the song as little kids, so I think it's sort of fitting for us to let our lights shine in this world, especially as we're outside recording an episode.
Yeah, even though it's a brisk fall day, not what you're used to in Arizona.
It is chilly. I'm checking it's 39 degrees out here. Ryan was telling me that apparently this is really close to shorts and sweatshirt weather.
That's the best weather.
I do not believe that at all. I'm in my hoodie. I'm in my beanie. I'm ready to go out here. But let's get into this conversation, though, about letting our lights shine. And we're going to start off, as we always do, with something that Jesus teaches us about letting our lights shine. And of course, you know where we're going, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, as he's talking about salt and light. But jumping into verse 14, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." We talk about this verse a lot, but how meaningful is this for you in thinking about discipleship?
Well, I think it is giving a vision of our purpose, and purpose is so helpful to hone in on. As like what we're doing this week, we're kind of stepping back and thinking about the past year, the future year, the big picture of our lives. And at some point, you got to come back to, what am I here for? And one way that Jesus expresses this is, you're here to be a light. And this is a picture, I think, drawn from Isaiah's many statements about how the Messiah and the people of God are meant to be a light that shines to all the Gentiles. We are a missional people. We have a purpose. We have a mission to take God's goodness out to the world. And so it's just helpful to remember, first of all, that I have a purpose that isn't about me. Mm-hmm. And second of all, that the way I do that is by letting God's light live in me, so that I'm doing his works, so that I'm speaking his word, so that I'm exemplifying his character. Something we don't do perfectly, but we certainly try to keep aligning ourselves again and again with who Jesus is.
I love the idea of getting back to your purpose here, because I guess, like you alluded to, that's sort of one of the things that we're doing this week, is just sitting down and thinking about, like, what are we doing here? Like, what does this next year look like? What have we accomplished up to this point? And it's always a good thing for you to do, especially if you get the opportunity to kind of do it out in a beautiful place like this. Mm-hmm. But thinking about why we're here, and Jesus' statement that our whole mission is to be seen by others, is to be an influence on other people. What I was thinking about from here is how we take the job that we're meant to do, and we mess it up and we muddy it up by putting a basket on our light. And Jesus says, like, it's a foregone conclusion that you don't go throwing a blanket over the top of your lamp. Like, you're not going to do that. I mean, in the cabin that we're staying in, there are like 4 lamps in the main area, and every one of them is like a bird connected.
A giant owl.
Like an owl connected to a lamp, and it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen, but like you can't imagine how functional those would be if you were literally like throwing blankets on these creepy looking lamps. You'd still be in the dark.
Yeah, and Jesus not only talks about what you don't do, you don't put a blanket over the owl lamp, but also what you do is you put it on a stand. And all of those owl lamps, one of them is up on a tree, kind of looks like it's on a perch,
We're gonna
way
have
up
to put
high.
pictures of these things in the show notes. They're ridiculous.
So. I feel like I'm in Hogwarts or something.
Really, it's frightening.
But they're up high. Mm-hmm. You don't like have a little lamp kind of down on the floor. It doesn't light as well. Usually they're coming from the ceiling or up high somewhere, and that's something for us to remember. Not only do we not want to conceal who we are in Christ, but we want to allow our works to be put up, not set on a pedestal like, we're above everybody else. We'll talk about that some more later, but put up high so that it's like intentionally shining out to as far as it can reach.
Yeah.
We're looking out on this beautiful lake, and you look at the way the water ripples, and you think about, I could probably get a rock from here to the lake, and the ripples that would come out from it just keep spreading outward, and eventually it'll fade away. But the more that our lives can ripple outward to the people, first immediate family, and then outward to our neighbors, our friends, the church, and then outward as far as we can reach. I think that's the idea. I'm switching up the metaphor, but I think that's the idea of putting it up high. Let it reach as far as it can.
Yeah, and you never know how far your influence can spread. Like, you don't know who is going to eventually be impacted by some kindness that you show to one person who's close to you, or a correction that you give, or an encouragement that you offer someone. Like, you never know how far that's going to go and spread. And if you look at the New Testament, you look at the spread of the gospel, you see even actions of like one or two faithful disciples just like exploding across the known world. And I don't think it's that different for us today. I think we can have a huge impact on others if we're willing to, like Jesus said here, be seen, get out there, be visible to the world around us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis in the world about being loud and proud, being, putting, whether it's, your political affiliation, your lifestyle, whether that's an immoral lifestyle or or just like the tribes that you consider yourself part of. You don't hide, you stand out, and you're willing to speak out. But in the same way, we have to get comfortable being seen.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to be seen. Sometimes it's hard to be different, but also I think there is a natural humility that most of us are brought up with, that it's a good thing, that's a virtue, obviously, that also sometimes we can take too far to where we don't want to be seen. Not that we're trying to make a big deal out of everything, but
yeah, the meekness and the humility, right? Like, we don't want people to see us, but at the same time, we need people to see us. And I think that leads into our next segment here on the episode, which is, do you understand?
Do you understand anything they're saying?
Oh, yes, Master Luke. Remember that I am fluent in over 6 million forms of
What are you telling them?
Hello, I think.
So we have this question that every time we read Matthew 5 and we read about being a light in the world, really we're confronted with a verse that's not too far away from it, which we find effectively in the next chapter, Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, where Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." So we're kind of left in this weird balance.
Yeah, which is it?
Which is it? And so the question here that we're going to ask, really, do you understand, stems from like, how do you find the balance between letting people see what you do and deciding that you're not going to be a show-off about it?
Yeah, well, certainly motive has to do with it. I also think about the Iceberg Principle.
Okay.
Like
lettuce?
No.
Okay.
Takes me to our discussion about how frozen lettuce is really bad.
It's disgusting.
And yet we call it iceberg. Think of a giant frozen chunk of ice, though, up in the Arctic. And when we think about an iceberg, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of like where they have the top of it peeking out, and then you've got this giant structure below it. And often with an iceberg, there's a lot more below the surface than above the surface. And I think that's a good principle to examine ourselves with, is most of what I'm doing that's good out in front of people, but when I'm alone, I'm not doing that? Or is this what I'm doing all the time, often without being seen? And I think that's part of what Jesus is giving us, is a principle of wisdom that can keep us on track. Do these things when you're not being seen all the time. And then, yes, allow people to see you doing it, but you're not just saying, everybody's looking. I'm gonna work up some righteousness, put on a little show, and that's a very different thing to let someone into your real life, but your real life is anchored in the secret times where you're constantly practicing what God wants you to practice, whether it's prayer or giving or other aspects of a holy life.
And I think when you really start to look at Matthew 6, and you really start to see that Jesus is talking about a group of people who just really have no motivation aside from people looking at them. Like, that's why they do everything. They're out there on the street corner. They're waving around their gift, like trying to get people to see how awesome they are. They're fasting, and they're making everybody aware of the fact that they're fasting right now because of their face and the way that their clothes are and everything like that. It's like their whole purpose is really to put a t-shirt on that says, like, I am the one who is doing good things, look at me. And that is a challenge, I think, when you're not that person, to really understand that I don't think Jesus is talking about you. Like, I don't think Jesus is talking about somebody who sincerely wants to help people and wants to serve people and wants to just love people and show kindness. Jesus is not talking about you when he says, beware of doing everything so that people can see you. I think Jesus is really referring to somebody else totally who isn't doing those things for the right reason. And of course, I think talking about motive is really a core piece of it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a time, I might have told you about this before. I was maybe 19 or 20 or something like that, and I went to visit some friends. I didn't know them really well, and we went out to lunch, and I said, do we want to pray? They were all Christians, and I thought, surely we want to give thanks for our food, probably. And I was rebuked.
Oh, wow.
I was told by a young man, this doesn't look like a closet to me. and it's not like we were in a booth. Nobody was looking. It's not like, excuse me, everyone. Over here at table 3, we're going to be praying.
Ding, 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 ding. Tap on the glass. Right?
Yeah. Holiness table over here. But, and it's fine. I fully understand. And the idea that if someone isn't comfortable praying based on that passage, praying anywhere that anybody can see them, I think you get into a little bit of interpretive difficulty when you see Jesus consistently leading public prayers
all the time,
before every meal,
yes.
Before every,
Yes.
I mean, it's sometimes there's thousands of people there watching him. But to your point, the idea isn't a outright new law forbidding any visibility of righteousness, because that would be the complete contradiction to the passage that's our text here we were looking at in Matthew 5:14-16. We have to be lights in the world, but part of that is being genuine in our service to God. And that's how the light is real. We're really reflecting God that way, and not having something, I don't know, like, those lights, the kind of eco-friendly lights that only when you walk by or when you open the bathroom door, they turn on, and then you leave and they're gone.
They're useful only for like a blip in time while anyone's actually looking at it or there, right?
Yeah. That's not a perfect metaphor, because they actually do give real light.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it, is like, somebody's looking. Now I'm gonna be this way. We, again, just coming back to our purpose. coming back to this as a function we can serve for others, if we're genuinely giving light, then people are not glorified. And this is another aspect of it.
Right.
The end goal, Jesus says, is not let your light be seen before men, that when people see your good works, they may glorify you. That's not what it says.
Right.
But that they may glorify the Father. And the kind of works you do and the kind of person you are is going to lead to either people glorifying you or people glorifying the Father. And that's another good test, I think, is what is the result? Is God being praised by what you're doing?
I think that's a really good point. And you think about why you do things and why you live a certain way and why you do anything. And I think a lot of times, like, especially in my prayers, and I know I've heard it from a lot of people who I really respect, their goal is to do things that glorify God. And whatever I do, I want him to be glorified, and I want people to see him shining in me. And that's really, again, the focus, that it's not about me. And, I'll tell you, there have been times where I'll give a sermon or I'll get done with a Bible class or something like that, some opportunity I've had to serve. And you'll get people naturally who come up and say thank you, and they appreciate you, and they kind of pat you on the back. And, it sort of goes back to our
golden pat on the back.
Golden pat on the back, right? It's like you're looking for those things, or you want those things. And I really have to be careful not to, because it is so tempting just to want that kind of recognition and praise. But that's not why I'm doing it. That shouldn't be why I'm doing it. And it's easy, I guess, maybe to shift your purpose from I'm doing it because of God and how I love him and how I want to glorify him, and shift that into, ooh, this feels really good right now, right? And so it is constantly a balance, which is why I think Jesus puts these things right next to each other. I think it's intentional that he's not just like changing the game or changing the script. Like, you do have to be careful, because at any moment you can go from doing things sincerely and genuinely to putting on a face or putting on a show.
Yeah, I think it's really good what you're bringing out, because we don't want to downplay the danger and the difficulty, the honest banana peel in the road that we all can slip up on consistently. Of that feels good to be. We all want to be appreciated. We all want to be liked and admired and respected, and we want our work to have value for people. But I think one helpful distinction is recognizing the difference between praise and appreciation.
That's true too. Yeah.
It's like the little me and the big me, or it's like the flesh likes the praise, and the spirit can appreciate just being loved and having value to people. Another way to think of it is the difference between knowing that the Father is pleased with what you're doing, that Jesus is smiling down. We sing the song, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes.
Yep.
And just that idea of God smiling on you can be really powerful when we remember, okay, that's where the real value is. Not that we aren't glad that someone got something from it, but that pleases God that they got something from it, and that makes me feel good.
Well, and you think about so many times, especially in like maybe 2 Corinthians or other places, where Paul is talking about just the amazing generosity that certain people had, right? And like how they gave and they were so liberal in their giving, and he's more being grateful for what they've done. He's more just expressing his thankfulness for them. And he's not like holding them up on some pedestal so that everybody can just see their glory and their amazingness. Like, he continues always to point to the reason behind their giving is that they love him and that they love God and they love Jesus. Like, that's the reason why they're doing it. And I don't know, there's so many good examples of, like you were talking about, gratitude. And that is a good thing. So even separating that out of like somebody being grateful for you is not necessarily taking something away from what you're doing. Like, you can still have people be grateful and also not be receiving the praise yourself. So that's, I think, a good, helpful sort of takeaway from some of this conversation, for me at least, is like, I'm literally close enough. I'm giving Ryan a pat on the back right now. Like, I can literally be...
Right back at you.
Thank you. I can literally be given a pat on the back and not feel like I'm somehow stealing valor or stealing God's glory somehow.
Well, honor is a word that we see used a lot among early Christians, like Paul saying, give honor to these people.
Right.
Give
Yeah.
honor.
Hold them in high esteem.
Yeah.
Right.
Value somebody who's giving his life, spending her life in service to others. That is worthy of appreciating. Honor is about, again, not worship, not praise, not exaltation. Honor is about worth and value. And going back to what you were talking about with the Philippians giving money to Paul, he says, you gave me that money, but that is in Philippians 4:18-19, that is a sweet smelling sacrifice to God.
Right.
You gave this to me, but it rose up and it made God happy.
Yeah.
And that idea of, again, just making God enjoy something, like bringing joy to God. That's a good day's work. If you can say, I did, it's not about me, but I was able to do this by God's grace to bring glory and joy back to Him after all that He continues to pour out on me. It's just a beautiful thought. And I think we found our way to how to let go of the meanness of letting our works be seen.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into our third segment here on the episode, and that, as always, is Through the Week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
So every week we drop 5 challenges that we're going to do, and we encourage you to do them along with us. This week, again, we are focused on letting our lights shine, and our first challenge is a reading challenge. And this week we're going to read Matthew 5, verses 14 to 16 that we already talked about earlier, John 8, verses 12 to 18, Philippians 2, 12 to 18, Isaiah 49, verses 1 to 13, and 2 Corinthians 4, verses 1 to 7. And I was focused here on Philippians 2 because, well, earlier in the week, we were reading Philippians all the way through, which is a great read, and we read it with a bunch of high schoolers who were just super excited to kind of step back and get a zoomed out view of this great book. Just a joyful book. And I was led to a new appreciation reading through it with them. And when we get here to verse 12, though, we start to see something about our influence in the world. As Paul says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure." And here's where the focus is. "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." He's equating here something that I think we all do, or we all have a tendency to do, and basically that is complaining and grumbling. Like, if you've never complained or grumbled, if you never just kind of got upset and, under your breath mumbled something, or you told somebody out loud, or got on Facebook and just started typing away about something that you were mad about, like, please write to us and let us know how you've accomplished that amazing feat. Because I think, like, every one of us have gotten to a point in our lives where we've grumbled or complained. And what Paul's basically equating here is the fact that when we get into that mode, we just extinguish our light. Like, that is a great example of putting the blanket over the owl lamp, or taking the batteries out of the flashlight, or whatever you want to say. Like, your influence just totally gets snuffed out when all you're doing is complaining and grumbling. And I don't know, it just makes me rethink what I'm really thankful for, how joyful I am, how grateful I am for things. And rather than being somebody who just looks at the glass half empty, who just sees things as less than they could be, or upset about the way somebody treated me or whatever, it's like, you can certainly be sad about something, or you can certainly be, wishing that things would be different. But like, when people see you as just being a sour, unloving, unexcited, unfun kind of person, like, they don't see Jesus in that. They don't see God in that. And I don't think you're bringing any light to their lives by that kind of behavior. And I just have to watch out for that myself.
Yeah, it's really, it would be easier to interpret that, and think of some other definition of sparkling holiness that's not about my light has something to do with not ever complaining,
Right.
or not arguing with someone. The picture of gratitude and contentment and appreciation and trust in God, as opposed to complaining and grumbling, makes you think of the Israelites. Of course, hard not to go back there.
Oh, yeah.
And then the picture of someone who, like in James 1:19-21, is listening instead of letting anger and an anxiousness to speak and to argue jump in, is willing to listen and willing to receive different people's thoughts with meekness and give a thoughtful response. And if you hold up two different kinds of people that in your mind's eye, the person who is always grumbling and complaining and arguing, and then the person who has gratitude that is just exuding from them and has compassion and love and meekness and humility that just flows from them, you can see why both of them might have a real conviction about the scriptures and believe in Jesus, and yet there's one of them that people are going to see something and say, hey, could you tell me about the hope that's within you? And another one that people are going to be like, that's a Christian?
Yeah.
So that's a great one. The next challenge is a reflect challenge, where we're going to meditate on a reflective question. And the question for this week is, do I ever hide or dim my light around others? So let's do some call and response, Brian.
Okay.
I want you to imagine yourself as 6-year-old Brian.
Okay.
In a class taught by maybe a Pam Sheely or a Joan Revis, and you hear out loud, blazing, "Hide it under a bushel." What's your response?
No, I'm going to let it shine. That's my response.
That is the correct response.
Although probably not in the same way I would have said it as a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
I would have said, no!
There it is. That is the correct response.
Yeah.
That's much more correct the
That's
second
true.
time around. And I think that's a good reminder, just that, hide it under a bushel? No! We teach our kids that response. First of all, when you're a kid, it's just fun to say no emphatically.
And say it loud and be allowed to say no.
That's
right?
so defiant.
That's true.
No. And I think there is a defiance in taking a stand that I won't hide my light, Jesus' light that's within me, under a bushel. I'm not going to let a basket, or like we were talking about before, hide it. But also, I love that this question has this idea of dimming. Do your lights have dimmer switches?
They're smart switches that all dim throughout my whole house. Yeah, so we can always turn it down to a certain percentage and stuff. And if you ever actually accidentally push it up to 100%, it's like, oh man, it's like the surface of the sun in here. Because you're not used to that. Like, you always have to dim it down a little bit, get the mood going.
Oh yeah, nice candlelit feel to it. And you can see with dimmed lights, but you can dim it down so far that you're still quite likely to trip over a coffee table or something if you don't know the landscape of the room. And that's, I think, where I need to watch out more personally is, do I turn it down a little bit just to accommodate people? And it's not to say that I'm not aware of people and that I don't want to be living with salt and grace and the kinds of things we talk about, but I think there's something about the Christian light that is inherently confrontational. It is kind of, whoa, that was bright. That guy, I wasn't used to the way that he responded to that question or the way that he dealt with that issue or whatever it is. He just walked right up to me and gave me a blessing, or
it sounds like a lot of people's reaction to Jesus, right?
Yeah,
like that's how when they saw him, they were like, "Whoa, hold on, that is not what I expected to see."
Yeah. But it is defying. Going back to being defiant, it defies expectation.
Right.
It defies what people expect whenever they see it. So that's a reminder for me to just think about: am I in any area of my life turning a little dimmer switch down in a particular relationship or a particular context at work or something where I am trying so hard to make other people comfortable that Christ is a little less visible in me.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to think about, especially when we consider that it's not like a binary switch. And I like that focus on dimming, because it's easy to think, well, like you're either on or you're off. But like, okay, am I like 85% right now, or am I like 35% right?
Yeah.
Like, where am I? And it kind of leads into our request challenge, which is a prayer this week that we'll pray together. Lord, give me the courage and love to shine. And that's based on Matthew 5:14 through 16, as we talked about earlier. Give me the courage to shine. And it's not about asking God to cause us to shine, but it's asking him to shore up within us that courage to do it. We have all the capability, we have all the tools we need to be able to shine. Sometimes it's that courage. And like you were talking about, like why would I choose to turn the dimmer down? Am I afraid? As Paul talks about in Romans, am I ashamed of the gospel in some way? And it's kind of interesting, because as we were thinking about recording this episode, like we're literally talking at a pretty loud volume level, and there have been people walking down the path, and like I don't know what they heard as they were walking by, but like part of me feels like in a meta way, like it takes a little bit of courage to like sit outside and have people walk by, potentially hear you talking about how much you love God. And I think that's cool. And I don't say that to say that we were out here so that we could be seen by people, again, see our last segment. But, certainly I think it takes courage to get out there. And if you can pray to the Lord to shore up within you that kind of courage, then I think that's always a good way to start out a day. It's always a good way to start out a year. And just to remember that you have something to offer the world if you would only get over your fears to be able to do that.
Yeah, it makes me think of the difference between let and so that, or Jesus says, let your light shine before others, or allow people to see something that you were going to do anyways, versus, as at the beginning of Matthew 6, doing this to be seen.
Right. Or
in
so
order
that.
to,
Yep.
the point is to be seen. It's just, this is what I'm doing. And if people see it and it brings some glory to God, that's all the better. Our next challenge is the Respond Challenge, where we put some of this into action. And this week's Respond Challenge is one of my favorite ways for letting our light shine, for being visible and even confrontational in the most gracious and loving way.
Right.
Which is to ask an acquaintance what you can pray about for them. And Adrienne, my wife, when she was a teacher in Phoenix and Tempe, she would every November go to people all around her, co-teachers, and just ask them what she could pray for them. And she said, okay, I'm going to be praying for you all day on November 12th. What can I pray about for you, for the people in your life? And it would be marked out, and she would do it every November. It's just not the whole year, but just going through November. And we're already in November, so if you wanted to do this in December, you could do. That's a great way to end the year, and you could go to people and let them know, I'm going to be praying for you this day. But you can also just go up to somebody or sit down with someone and say, hey, I've been thinking about you. Is there anything I can pray about with you or for you? There's some ladies at church that whenever they go out to eat, they say, hey, we're about to pray to their server. Would you like to join us? And is there anything that we can pray for you about? And I think that's just another way. There's just all these little ways, and prayer is a blessing. Most people appreciate that you care enough to offer a request to your God. And frankly, we are the priests of God. We are the ones who go to God on behalf, not only of ourselves, but of the whole world, asking for his blessing on the world. So I just think that's such a simple but helpful way in to connect with someone and let some light shine.
Yeah, and you talk about doing something that might not be confrontational. I mean, that's probably the least confrontational thing that you can do. Like, you're not poking somebody in the eye. You're not trying to tell people like they're going to hell or anything like that. You're expressing your love for them and how much you care about them. And if you're doing that with sincerity and they see that, I think that's a great way that you can interact with people. And so that leads to our last challenge here, which is a reach out challenge. It's a question that we're going to ask each other. And you can ask somebody that you know this question as well. Is there a time you wish you had let your light be seen? So I guess we'll just talk about that for ourselves. Is there a time that you wish you had let your light be seen?
Yeah, it makes me think, first of all, to ask the question, what does it mean for my light to be seen? Which I know we've just talked about for an hour, but at the same time, it goes with the dimmer light question. Like, are there times that I have not had the knob turned to 11, as we said in a recent daily? You know, that happens a lot. And there's times in my youth, certainly, that I have let other people's influence really diminish how much I was willing to let my identity as a Christian define me, not only to them, but to myself even.
Sure.
Here now, as an adult, I think that it's more that dimming at times where I don't take every opportunity that I have to, for instance, be a peacemaker or to think of myself as being on a mission to the people around me. And I've, for a long time, been pretty visible. I mean, now it's my job, so it's really easy to let people know, I'm an evangelist, so, you're a Jesus person, at least I know that much. But even, when I was in college or at my last job, when I was an advertising guy, everybody knew who I was. They knew that was a big part of my life, but I didn't let it affect the relationship as much as I could have. I didn't mention things and celebrate the goodness of God and live with that light of joy and find ways to bring gifts and to bring good works to other people as much as I could have. I mean, I could have really been more hospitable. I could have been more of service. I could have brought Jesus' name into the conversations more. I could have invited people more consistently to do things with us in the church or, in First Friday gatherings or whatever. I think it's that kind of thing more so. But I mean, as far as really hiding, there are plenty of times when I've done that in my life too, where I've really just said, I'm just not going to say anything right now. I'm going to just spiritually, at least, kind of back into the shadows in the corner here. I certainly can feel some shame for those moments, and I'm grateful that the Lord continues to work with me and bless me and give grace for all of those times.
I think it's interesting, as you were talking sort of about like the opportunities you could have used more. Like, we've already established that I was a very young man when Ryan was an old man when we first met. But like
old man of 19.
As I was 14, I mean, that was ancient at the time. But I could not have thought of anyone who like pulled people in more and was more welcoming and connected people more and like got people thinking about important spiritual things. And so what I find interesting here is that even though you might look to somebody as being like, this guy's light is up to 11, like you were just talking about, those people, I think, often feel like they're not doing as much as they could. And maybe that's true for them. Maybe they feel like there's more that could be done. And maybe you felt that way. Maybe I felt that way. And sometimes I think it's helpful to have that perspective of somebody looking at it when you're looking at it and you're thinking you're not doing enough, and they're seeing you and saying, you're doing more than anyone else could be. And I don't know, for myself, I wish my light would have been seen more, especially when I was younger, especially when, like you were talking about, you just have the influence of people around you, people who aren't followers of the Lord's, who just really have their own priorities and have their own desires to fulfill and are just living it up. And I certainly was influenced by those kinds of people more than I should have been, rather than I was being an influence on them. But I also think about, like, even in just parenting, I know we've been kind of talking about this week, but like, we had this conversation about what do I want to look back on that I took advantage of, or that I did well, or some moment that I really grabbed the bull by the horns and I did exactly what was needful in that moment. And you can look back on those kinds of things in hindsight, years down the road and say, 2022 was the year where I did exactly what I intended to do and set out to do. And there have been a lot of those moments where, looking back on my parenting and the way that I maybe didn't take advantage of those opportunities, maybe I didn't make moments of things that I should have made moments about, like have conversations that were difficult or challenging. And maybe somebody could look outwardly at me and say, well, you're doing a great job as a parent, or your daughter's respectful and she's loving and she's thoughtful of other people. And maybe they'll say things that might be positive about it. But I think you always see the warts. You always see the opportunities that you've missed. And there are times, even in just the way I've lived within my family, is I know I could have done better. And I know I could have been more of an influence. And, sometimes the people who are closest to you are the people who know the most about you and who see your warts and who see all the difficulties that you go through. I'm sure they could tell you a whole lot of times where my light didn't shine as well as it could have.
Yeah, that's two different kinds of not shining in a way. There's sort of the intentional dimming.
Right.
And then there's sort of I somewhere along the way unplugged my own light because right. I have my own, foolishness or, rebellion against God or whatever, we have our moments where we just sort of lose our priorities or stumble. I think that your discussion about parenting is a really interesting other layer to bring into this. You brought up earlier, sometimes we don't know how the ripples are going to go outward or how our light is going to touch people and how far it's going to shine. And our kids are really one way where who knows who they're going to be? Yeah. Who knows how many people they're going to touch? Who knows what an impact we are going to have through them as they amplify our influence outward into beyond our own lives.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty humbling thought, as we've talked about how humbling it is to sit here and see God's glory all around us, how humbling it is to appreciate, a year of blessing as God has brought us through more interesting times.
Interesting times.
May you live in interesting times. How God continues to gift these things to us, and someday our finite lives will come to an end. And yet, as that wonderful verse in Revelation says, blessed are those who die in the Lord, for their deeds do follow them.
Yeah.
The works that we do can be a light beyond ourselves.
That's a good way to put it. And I think it's a good way to wrap up this episode, is just forward-looking, thinking about the future. What can we do going forward? And how is our impact going to land in this world? I honestly have no idea, but I'm excited to find out. It's pretty cool to think about. So as we move forward in this conversation about leadership next week, we are going to get into the wrap-up episode in our discussion here, kind of putting a bow on the whole thing, talking about how we can lead in community with other people. So what's the topic for the last week of leadership?
We're going to talk about shepherding. And this is one of the Bible's most defining metaphors for leadership. And I think it's a really inspiring and helpful picture as we figure out our own leadership style in our families, in our Bible classes we teach, in our relationships at work, and just with people that are around us, maybe people who are a little younger than us that we reach out to mentor, our own friends. Everybody is leading in different ways. And how are we going to reflect the Good Shepherd in the way that we lead?
I think that's going to be an exciting episode. And as we've already kind of been talking about here on this episode, you can see shepherding fitting into a lot of the conversation that we've had. So thinking about Jesus as our good shepherd and the great shepherd, really, I think is always something that we can latch onto and just...
Good to great.
Good to great. I mean, what's greater than great? Let's go there. So thanks, everybody, for tuning into the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or at BibleGeeks.fm/132. You can also follow along with this cross-training series there on our website as well. And if you want to see pictures of the lovely place, also of the bench of knowledge that we are currently sitting on,
It's a real
check
thing.
out our website there at BibleGeeks.fm/132. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in, and may the Lord bless you and keep you today.
Shalom.
Oh, yeah!
I love it.